Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick2. Today I'm going to be showing you guys the best Sorcerer build in all of Season 8 that you can very easily set up without any crazy gear or a ton of playtime or anything like that, and still be able to just completely annihilate all Torment 4 content. As you can see, the bosses just get completely nuked. You can do pretty high tiers of the pit, and I'd say the build is probably the fastest build in the game. It's also Sorcerer's best option at the moment if you're really looking to crank out as much damage as humanly possible, while doing all forms of content really quick. This build also scales very well with mythic uniques, but my current character is actually using 0 mythic uniques, and my gear really isn't anything too impressive, which you guys will see. I really wanted to showcase a kind of entry-level version of the build, and the fact that you can do pretty much everything in the game other than like super high tiers of the pit with very achievable and pretty entry-level gear, to be honest. As always, the build will be linked down below, and I'll be updating it as I find more optimized ways to set it up, but I've spent a lot of time on this. I'm pretty happy with how this is right now. We have 2 versions, the no Uber starter version, which is what I'm currently on, and then the Uber unique version, which I'm going to swap to once I'm done with this video, because I actually was able to get some of the Uber uniques, but I don't have them on my character at the moment. I'm going to add a pit pushing version at some point in the future, but most people don't give a crap about that, and the Uber unique version can probably easily do up to like tier 80 to 90 without too much difficulty. One of the questions you guys will most likely have, and that I want to answer, is when can I swap to this build? When is it going to be better than my other options? What is actually preventing me from swapping to this? So previously I made a video going over what I think is the best starter Sorcerer build, which is Blizzard. Blizzard requires effectively no gear. You can level with it the second that you get the glacial aspect. You just put on Blizzard and boom, you're cranking 90s on them, treasure goblins. So you can get up to T4 very easily with this with basically no gear, right? I'd say once you're in Torment 4 and then you have at least one Fractured Winterglass with a fairly decent roll, and then you have a weapon saved up that's going to have crit damage and like some open tempers so that you can put on the lightning spear tempers, and then maybe like a pair of gloves or a pair of rings with crit damage. Crit damage is what scales this build. So if you swap to this and have 0 crit damage on your gear, it's going to be kind of bricked. But I'd say the only thing you really need is a Fractured Winterglass, preferably with at least 1 GA. And you want the GA to either be on Primordial Binding or Transfer Frozen Orb projectiles to cast twice. I literally just got this roll and it isn't even that good. I was actually using this one for the longest time as I was into Torment 4, and it pretty much instantly outperformed Blizzard. I was able to go from like doing, I think I went from like T55s on Blizzard in like 7 or 8 minutes or something, and then I put this on and then I was able to do it in like 1 or 2 minutes on a lightning spear. So it is definitely better than Blizzard. If you prefer Blizzard, you can just stay on it because you can do most content with Blizzard, but the bossing is going to be a little bit challenging unless you have really good gear. But this build, you can just slap it on, and like I said, the only prerequisite really is just getting Fractured Winterglass. You guys have probably heard the lightning spear is very gear dependent in the past, and that is true because you want a lot of cooldown reduction so that you can realistically spam out your lightning spear. That's why the entry level version of the build is using a Winterglass to kind of mitigate the fact that you don't have a lot of cooldown reduction very early on, so you can't just sit there holding down your lightning spear key. You actually need to spawn projectiles in other ways, which is going to be by just casting frozen orbs. Anytime that we cast frozen orb, we have a chance to spawn some projectiles, and those projectiles are going to be lightning spears, so that's going to help us with just more uptime on damage. But also Fractured Winterglass just by default has Primordial Binding on it, which is extremely good and one of the main ways we scale our damage. You just get extra summon damage for each summon that you have active. It's also very nice because it just basically gives you move speed cap, which is super cool, and it gives you a ton of mana regen so you can sustain the cost of just spamming Frozen Orb. Once you get Uber uniques, mainly the Harlequin Crest is when you can swap into the no Fractured Winterglass version of the build, but if you swap to an amulet that doesn't have Primordial Binding, you're going to lose a crap ton of damage, so you really don't want to swap to a pure Lightning Spear version without Frozen Orb until you have both a Harlequin Crest and ideally Masterworked cooldown reduction or GA cooldown reduction, and then an amulet with Primordial Binding ranks on it, which is a bit of a steep gear requirement, right? But I've been using this setup, no Uber uniques or anything, and just absolutely annihilated all T4, so it's perfectly fine. How the build functions is we basically just spam Frozen Orb, spawn a lot of Lightning Spears, spam Lightning Spear on our keyboard, and then we also have a Splintering Aspect to make our Lightning Spear do a lot of damage, and it scales its damage with crit damage. So we try to get crit damage everywhere, namely on weapon, gloves, rings, etc. And ideally you want it GA. I don't even have that, and there's a lot of places where my gear is pretty crappy, to be honest with you guys, and as you saw in the gameplay, it's still perfectly fine damage wise. Let's go over skills. So we have Flame Shield for the immunity here, we have Frozen Orb of course, and Frozen Orb also gives us a little bit of mana when we hit a frozen enemy, so that's pretty nice. We got Teleport with a few ranks into it. Teleport's very important for the Crackling Energy, and we want to be hitting mobs with it. The Crackling Energy gives us a lot of damage via one of our Paragon nodes, and also one of the skill tree points, so that's very important, and it's also just great for mobility. Then we have Familiar with the Familiar enchant here. I've tried a ton of enchants on this build, and in theory in my head I'm like, there shouldn't really be too big of a difference between the two, but for whatever reason when I use Familiar, I seem to just do infinitely more damage. There's probably a couple reasons for that. It probably scales with the Paragon Node Enchantment Master a little bit better. I don't know, but here's gameplay of me using Ice Blades enchant, which I thought would be pretty good because, you know, you get more Ice Blades out, helps with your conjurations, has a slightly better lucky hit chance than the Familiar. And I just couldn't do any damage. It also would give me some attack speed. I figured it'd be pretty good, but I just can't do any damage. And it's the same case when I swap it to pretty much any other enchant, but then when I have Familiar on, I just absolutely annihilate the bosses. You can see this was literally back to back. So, is what it is. Familiar is what I'd recommend there. And then we have Teleport Enchant here as well. One of the reasons we want Teleport Enchant is for mobility and also the crackling energy uptime like I was talking about, but also, like I said, the Paragon Node Enchantment Master, if I can find it here, 40% increased damage of that main element, and Teleport is a shock skill, so we get 40% more damage for our Lightning Spear there. Then we have Unstable Currents. We try to have pretty good uptime on this. This can spawn a lot of Lightning Spears while it's active. You also get some increased attack speed, so we try to have good uptime on that. And I have some points into Frost Nova because I'm using a Frost Nova rune, but I'll talk about runes later, and there's a lot of options there. It's really not all that big of a deal. When it comes to skill tree, just follow the link down below. It's pretty cut and dry though, just random points here, Frozen Orb for the mana. Then we go Potent Warding just to give you a lot of resist. You can take points out of here if you're overcapped. Flame Shield, 1 point, Teleport. And we just get some more ranks in here so that it has a lower cooldown. And then we got the Crackling Energy, very important. Glass Cannon, Ice Armor. Ice Armor is good for just defense and also gives you another skill to press. So you have just more barrier uptime really. And it has a pretty low cooldown with Shimmering there. Then we have Frost Nova paired with Mystical Frost Nova. This is not on my bar, but it is... I'm activating it via one of my runes for just a little bit of extra damage. It also pairs nicely with one of our boss powers. Then we have Familiar, so this just gives us 10% increased damage while it's active. We don't want to put Familiar on our bar because if we do, then Fractured Winterglass's effect will start to randomly spawn Familiars, and we want this effect to only be spawning Lightning Spears. Other stuff, we go Lightning Spear and then the stun. We go Primordial Binding, of course, Mana Shield, there's defense, just some very generic stuff here, nothing that is really all that important, just damage, cooldown, damage, or whatever. And then Convulsions is important. While you have Crackling Energy, you gain 15% increased damage. Then we have Enlightenment, which is really good, just gives you a ton of extra damage while it is active, attack speed, damage, very nice. On bosses, you kind of want to play around this, but I'll talk about that, and I'll do like a dedicated little bossing tips section of the video. When it comes to gear and uniques, etc., how else you want to set the build up. Uniques that are very important, I would say, are Talrasha. Ideally, you want to get cooldown reduction GA, but this version of it, using Frozen Orb, is not as dependent on cooldown reduction to function well, so it'll be perfectly fine without it. I actually just recently got this too. But Talrasha is great, it gives you a lot of extra damage. Another unique that is fantastic is Rakenos Wake because it rolls with cooldown reduction on it. It has attack, reduce, evade, cooldown on it, so you can kind of spam your teleport enchant, which is really important for us. And then we also have just a ton of resist all elements, so it makes it really easy there. Ideally, you'd want the GA on the cooldown reduction, of course. And then, obviously, we want a Fractured Winterglass, and ideally, the way that you want this to roll is with greater affix to Primordial Binding, and then you want the bottom roll, the lucky hit chance / the Frozen Orb chance to be as high as possible. Unfortunately, mine is like a pretty mid roll on there, and if I wanted to min-max more, I'd masterwork this and get it into the Primordial Binding, but I didn't, whatever. The unique options that you have, I would say, if you don't have a helmet that has cooldown reduction and / or ranks to Lightning Spear, if I can find it here, Slayer Crown is decent because it just rolls with cooldown reduction on it by default. I really don't like using it because the damage is very inconsistent. I don't really care for the pulling aspect of it all that much. And also, I would rather just have a defensive aspect on a normal helmet. Also, the ranks of Lightning Spear is just going to net you more damage, so I would recommend just a normal helmet if you get a pretty good one, but otherwise, this is good in the meantime. Another thing some people use is Raiment. Raiment is pretty decent. I have a fairly decent roll here. But if I were to put this on, it would like completely nuke my armor, and then I would lose Orange Herald aspect, which is pretty good. So I decided to opt out of this. Another option is Tibalt's Will if you just have it. If I were to put this on again, it would kind of just nuke my armor, and my resistances would be a bit more of a problem, but you could realistically add this on without too much difficulty. It also helps with your mana a bit, and it does give you more damage, but you lose a slight bit of defense. I'd say it's about net neutral. If you build around it, it just makes it a little bit more difficult to build, which is why I'm not currently using it or recommending it, but it's more or less the same. Other aspects you want to go for, so of course we want Splintering on a two-handed staff, because this is literally all of our damage. And then there's a lot of different options. What I've landed on is Battlecasters, because it gives us ranks to our conjuration skills. So it just gives you a lot of ranks to your lightning spear, which is going to net you a lot of damage. And then I have Shredding Blades aspect for just 35% increased vuln damage. Another one that you could use is while Unstable Currents is active, you have a chance to spawn another shock skill. Difficult to kind of test how valuable that is. I just decided to go for more raw damage instead. And I've swapped these around quite a lot, and this is just what I've landed on. Defensive aspects, you want Ever Living for less damage from crowd control, they're vulnerable. And then you want, the other one is Concentration for just DR when you cast a Conjuration skill. And then you want Orange Herald to have a lucky hit chance to reduce your ultimate skill cooldown, so you can just have more uptime on Unstable Currents. Talk about runes in a sec. When it comes to just what you want on each individual piece, Helmet, ideally, you want cooldown reduction, ranks at Lightning Spear, and then mana per second. But the mana per second isn't too important. You can see that my mana is pretty good when I'm just activating all my abilities. It kind of stays up because you have so much mana regen via Primordial Binding there, that getting flat mana per second isn't too important. You could rather get life or armor here if that makes setting up the rest of the build easier. And then chest, you could also get intelligence too for damage. And then for tempers, you want maximum life, and then barrier gen or crowd control duration, both are fine. And then on the chest, you want intelligence, max HP, armor, that's perfectly good. And then temper on armor if you still need it, or you could do life, and then barrier gen. Gloves, ideally you want GA crit damage, and then you want crit chance and attack speed, and then temper on crit damage and barrier gen. Pants, int, max HP. I have a GA to all res, this helps me reach my all res caps, but keep in mind, when you're looking at your resistances, you also need to factor in the fact that you're going to have potent warding here. You can see that my resist went from 50 to basically capped here. But also, a lot of the time, I run around with incenses. You can have these up pretty much all the time. It just gives you 10% all res as well, and it gives you 150 armor. And then I also usually run around with Rahir, which gives me 15% more armor. And you could also even do another incense. See if I have it on me. There's another incense that gives you like a raw 300 armor, so it makes it a lot easier to reach your armor breakpoints. You could also supplement by getting even more resistance in your Paragon board if you really needed it, so getting all res isn't really all that difficult. I kind of just happen to have these pants roll like this, and I haven't found a better pair of pants. Ideally, you'd have the GA on like int though. And then on the boots here, Rakenos Wake, you want the GA to either be on cooldown reduction. Well, you should want it on cooldown reduction. Damage is okay, and then resist all elements would also make your resist a little bit easier. And then on your weapon, you want the GA to be crit damage, because this is where all of our damage is coming from, really. And then you have intelligence, max HP, and then you want a temper chance for lightning spear to deal double damage, and you ideally want to masterwork all into that stat. And then you want to put on crit damage as well. And then we just have crit damage sockets in here. Arasha, you want cooldown reduction GA, and then in my sockets here I put armor, and a little bit of res. You could go either way, just depends on what your stats are looking like really. And then ideally for the Taurasha, cooldown reduction GA, and try to get the percentage roll to be as high as possible. This is just 75% damage all the time, which is crazy. And then we have another ring, ideally crit damage GA, attack speed, life. This is probably my best item, to be honest, even though it doesn't have crit damage GA. And then you want to put on Unstable Currents cooldown reduction, and then crit damage, of course. And then, like I said, with the Amulet, you want it to be GA Primordial Binding if possible. The second best would be Chance for Frozen Orb Prodigies to cast twice, and then you just want the bottom roll there to be as high as possible too. When it comes to runes, you have quite a few options. I guess let's talk about boss powers first, and then we'll talk about runes, because the boss powers kind of feed into the runes. So we have Beastmaster's Training. This is just mandatory. Makes your summon do more damage based on how much crit damage you have, so try to max this out ASAP. And then we have Hatred Embraces Haste. This thing is insane. This gives you 50% crit chance straight up, so it makes reaching 100% crit very easy, and all of your build damage is crit damage, so this is very important. These two things are absolutely mandatory. And then for our next two, I have Beast in the Ice's Sleet. This reads after casting 3 skills which apply crowd control effects, shoot out sleet spikes. If I cast 3 frozen orbs, it'll spawn this. If for some reason it has different functionality if it's on a boss or not. Well, I'll just demonstrate. If I shoot out 3 of these, then I'm going to spawn the thing around me, and that's going to freeze and do a little bit of damage. This does a very good amount of damage as baseline, but the main reason we use it is to pair it with Lilith's Wind of Hate, which is then going to spawn these little blister things. And the reason that this is good is because the way that splintering aspect works is it's going to cause like an arcing effect. So you'll realize that your damage on bosses is really shitty. But if you do this, you get an additional mob, which will allow quadratic scaling with splintering energy to actually work. That's why your damage is so good against mobbing, but when you're fighting bosses, it's like really crappy. So getting the additional mob there, it'll mean that the lightning spear will actually be able to arc between multiple of them, and then you'll benefit from splintering on bosses. It'll also just proc a lot of extra damage because the clones themselves will take HP flat off of the boss. This just gives your bossing damage like, I don't know, it's like 10x or something like that. It just gives you infinitely more boss damage. Without these two things paired together, your boss damage is pretty weak. Decent Isis Sleets will actually proc from Lightning Spears because this counts as a crowd controlled effect, and also Frozen Orb because Frozen Orb chills. So you'll see that if I just sit here spamming, then I have a ton of these procking, and it'll just spawn a whole bunch of the clones, and then that'll allow my Lightning Spears to have more mobs to hit, therefore giving me more boss damage. This is another reason that I'm using the Frost Nova rune. I really don't think it's that great, but it's 15% damage, because if you spec into Frost Nova, you do 15% more damage when it procs. But also Frost Nova can proc the Beast and Isis thing, so it counts as one of those 3 skills. You just have a little bit more uptime on the Isis Fleet, therefore a little bit more uptime on the clones that spawn. But I would say for this rune you could use literally anything that you want. Varian's Warcry is pretty decent, but the Frost Nova one is like very achievable. It's not a legendary one, it's hard to get, it's not expensive or anything, so pretty much anybody can use it, which is kind of why I have it here. And then I have Nagu paired to it. Nagu is a little bit harder, but there's a lot of really good runes that you can use. I would say Chem is pretty good, or Sir is also very good, and so is Bach if you happen to get it. For the other one, I have Chem paired with Gar. This just gives you 25% crit chance, so you can get up to 100% crit chance very easily. Once you have a little bit better gear, you could eventually opt out of this. I'd say 99% of the time, it's just better to use this so that you can easily get to 100% crit chance, because all your damage is crit related. And you don't really have many other very good options. One of the other options I was using a lot of the time, rather than the Frost Nova one, was to reduce the cooldown of my ultimate so that I could have a little bit better uptime on Unstable Currents. If you don't have much cooldown reduction on your character, and your Unstable Currents is like 30 seconds plus, then I would probably recommend using Zek instead of the Frost Nova. I've kind of been messing around with this. It's really not all that big of a deal. Paragon Board, I have linked down below, and I optimize it a little bit more, so I would just follow that. But glyphs that are important, we got Charge, we got Unleash. The most important one is Destruction, because it just gives you a lot of crit damage, and that's very important for your character. Tactician for damage, to then buff crit damage around it. And we also have Exploit, which is just a little bit more damage. Important nodes, you don't really have to play around these at all. Static Surge is 50% more damage. Searing Heat is just 60% more damage. Ceaseless Conduit is the only one that really matters, kind of. But as long as you have Crackling Energies, which you will have by simply just teleporting onto mobs and hitting them, and then if you press Unstable Currents every once in a while, it'll give you basically full Crackling Energies if you're making sure to just weave in teleports while fighting, and then you'll basically just maintain full Crackling Energy. So that's pretty easy to play with. And then Enchantment Master is very good, so your enchants are just a little bit more potent. So we just have Teleport Enchant, has lower cooldown, it also gives you a ton of damage paired with it. So that's the Paragon Board, pretty cut and dry. Now let's talk about how to optimize your damage for bosses. So one thing that's very important is Enlightenment. Enlightenment is going to give you a lot of damage when it reaches 100 stacks. And the way that it works is it'll give you more stacks if you are alternating between different types of skills. So a Frost skill, Fire skill, and a Lightning skill. If I just spam Frozen Orb, you can see I only get 1 per. But if I do Frozen Orb, Teleport, Frozen Orb, Teleport, then I'll have it active. You don't really have to play around this too much. I would say if you're just trying to do a Tormented boss, try to get to, around 90 stacks before it spawns. And then when it spawns, you can just kind of go ham. In terms of what order you want to do stuff in, honestly, it doesn't really matter. I would just say you could button mash and you're perfectly fine. I'd say maybe build it into your muscle memory to try to evade after a Frozen Orb. Maybe don't do Teleport and evade at the same time, because then you would only get 2 stacks rather than 11. So let's just say this was a boss. I would probably, I don't know, like Lightning Spear, Ice Armor, Ultimate, and then just like spam my buttons, and I'd make sure to just press spacebar every time it's active, so that I'm just keeping my Enlightenment stacks up a little bit better. While Enlightenment buff is actually active, it's not really helping all that much, but you do get the Crackling Energy. So it's kind of just good to have it built into your muscle memory, and you basically just hold down right click and kind of just spam like a monkey, and it's pretty easy. You can see that you build up the Enlightenment stacks really, really fast doing this. So you can see it's about to drop off here, and we can see how fast I build it up. So boom, 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 boom. If you just like spam your buttons, that was pretty good. So like maybe like 3 or 4 seconds of downtime, and then it has way more uptime. And if you're just spamming all your buttons, you have everything active. Another thing is that you want to try to stay close to the mob, because if you're really far away, your lightning spear, it has to travel all the way back to you, and that'll just give you way less uptime. So you want to be like, you know, in the mob's ass most of the time. That's also better for Frozen Orb anyway, because it has less travel time, so then you'll have higher uptime on getting like more spears out active at one time. Run a higher tier of pit. Elixir that I would recommend would be Advantage, because it gives you attack speed as well as lucky hit chance, which is actually fairly decent for us. The attack speed is just more Frozen Orb, so you do more damage because you get more lightning spears out, and it just feels nice. And the lucky hit chance is also good for the Fractured Winter Glass itself. And then incenses, I like to use Soothing Spices or Sage's Whisper for just int. Song on the Mountain is good if you actually need the armor, or you can just use Redamine Buzz for a little bit of extra life. So I don't really need the armor currently, so I'm going to go for a Redamine Buzz with the Soothing Spices there. I don't even think I need the Soothing Spices. I guess I have one active right now, so that's why. And I'll just do like a tier 66 or something. This is what I've been able to do like really quick. It's not worth doing like slightly higher, but then it taking like twice as long. With this setup, you could probably easily do up to like tier 80 or something. It just might take a little bit of time. But once you have all the uber uniques and stuff, doing higher tiers is very easy because you just have way more lightning spears out and you just do straight up more damage, right? But when it comes to playing with the build, very simple. Kind of just teleport around and spam your Frozen Orb. If there's a mob that has a lot of HP that you're struggling with, just try to get close to it, because if you're closer to it, then you'll just do more damage, right? But you kind of ramp as you get more and more lightning spears out. You'll do more and more damage, and you just press all your buttons on cooldown to kind of help with your enlightenment uptime, and just to give you more lightning spears total, right? One aspect that is very good is increased damage while ice armor is active. It also gives you an extra damage bonus if the mobs are frozen, which is very good. The reason that I'm not using it and that I don't recommend it is that you really need a lot of cooldown reduction and attack speed to have ice armor up with 100% uptime, and I only recently got enough like cooldown reduction to have my ice armor up literally always. And if it's not up always, I don't like damage that is like, you know, sometimes there and sometimes not. I'm not a huge fan of the enlightenment passive, but it really is just our best option at this point. Only way to really scale this build. But I would say if you have like cooldown reductions where you can see that you get your ice armor up like back while it's still active, then you could probably use it. But it's like marginally better than Threading Blades anyway, so really not that big of a deal. Otherwise, yeah, build is pretty easy. I'd have way more damage if my glyphs were leveled up more too, if I had just more levels in general. And obviously my gear is really not optimized. I don't have nearly as much crit damage as I should, but pretty easy to play. It's very fast, especially if you're doing like Curass Undercity. You can literally just hold down teleport, which is pretty fun. And the lightning spears kind of just fly around everywhere and just nuke everything for you. To be honest with you guys, I've played this build before and I really don't like it because I like feeling like I'm doing the damage rather than lightning spear. So I'm kind of going to min-max this a little bit with the uber unique version just to make a video, and then I'm going to swap over to ice shards because that just seems way more fun to me. So I've been saving up all the gear for that. This is undoubtedly the best build though, probably. Ice shards you could probably do T4 without too much difficulty, but yeah, I'm just really not that much of a fan of this build because I just don't like lightning spear. Like, I wish lightning spear wasn't that good. But you can see the boss damage is really good because we got the clones there. Mob got staggered instantly with the Ice of Sleet, so you just get extra frozen damage and stuff. And yeah, that was pretty simple. I barely got enough fragments there, so I can upgrade my exploits. I got another 5% damage. That's pretty nice. I guess glyph priority, if you want to know, is just upgrade destruction ASAP. But yeah, just follow the Paragon board down below. Yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you did, make sure to drop a like. Let me know what builds you want to see next. And thanks for watching. See you guys later. Peace.